There's a massive river flowing through the Atlantic Ocean right now. You can't see it from the surface, but it's there, moving more water than all the rivers on Earth combined. And it's starting to fail. This invisible river is called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC for short. And if it collapses, Europe could face an ice age within decades. Not centuries. Decades. Here's what makes this terrifying: we thought we had time. Climate models predicted the AMOC might weaken gradually over the next century or two. But new research published in 2024 suggests we've drastically underestimated how fast this system is unraveling. The warning signs are already here. To understand what's at stake, you need to understand what the AMOC actually does. Picture the Atlantic Ocean as a giant conveyor belt. Warm water from the tropics flows north along the surface, carrying heat toward Europe. This is the Gulf Stream, the most famous part of the system. When this warm water reaches the North Atlantic near Greenland and Iceland, something remarkable happens. The water is salty, and as it cools in the Arctic air, it becomes dense. So dense that it sinks, plunging deep into the ocean. This sinking drives the entire circulation system, pulling more warm water north to replace it. The cold, deep water then flows south along the ocean floor, eventually rising back to the surface in other parts of the world. The whole process moves about 15 million cubic meters of water per second. That's more than 100 Amazon rivers worth of flow. This system is the only reason Europe is habitable at the latitude where it sits. London is at the same latitude as Calgary, Canada. Paris lines up with Newfoundland. Rome is level with New York City. But European winters are dramatically warmer than those North American cities. London rarely sees the -30-degree temperatures that Calgary experiences regularly. The AMOC delivers so much heat to Europe that it raises temperatures by 5 to 10 degrees Celsius across much of the continent. Without it, Europe's climate would look completely different. We know this because it's happened before. About 12,800 years ago, during a period called the Younger Dryas, the AMOC suddenly shut down. The trigger was massive amounts of fresh water flooding into the North Atlantic from melting glaciers. This fresh water diluted the ocean's salinity, making the water less dense, so it stopped sinking. The conveyor belt stopped. Within decades, temperatures across Europe plummeted. Britain, which had been warming and seeing the return of forests and human populations after the last ice age, suddenly reverted to near ice age conditions. Archaeological evidence shows that humans who had recolonized Britain around 15,200 years ago were forced to abandon it again. The temperature drop was that severe and that fast. This wasn't a gradual cooling. Paleoclimate records from ice cores and sediment samples show the temperature crashed in as little as 10 years in some regions. Imagine modern Europe experiencing that today. Here's why scientists are worried. We're seeing the exact same trigger happening right now. Greenland's ice sheet is melting at an accelerating rate. In the 1990s, Greenland was losing about 34 billion tons of ice per year. By the 2010s, that had increased to over 280 billion tons annually. That's a more than 8-fold increase in just 2 decades. All that melting ice becomes fresh water pouring into the North Atlantic. It's diluting the ocean's salinity in exactly the same way that triggered the Younger Dryas collapse. And measurements show the AMOC has already weakened by about 15% since the mid-20th century. But the truly alarming discovery came from recent studies analyzing current patterns and temperature data. Researchers found that the AMOC isn't just weakening gradually. It's showing signs of approaching a tipping point, a threshold beyond which the system could collapse rapidly and irreversibly. Ocean current systems don't die in a straight line. They're stable until they're not. Think of it like a table. You can push a table slowly toward the edge of a cliff, and for a long time, nothing changes. The table sits there, stable. But once enough of it hangs over the edge, it suddenly tips and there's no stopping it. The AMOC appears to be approaching that edge. Multiple independent studies have identified early warning signals, statistical patterns in ocean temperature and salinity data that indicate a system losing stability. These are the same patterns that appear before other complex systems collapse, from ecosystems to financial markets. If the AMOC crosses that tipping point, the consequences for Europe would be catastrophic. Climate models suggest that a collapse could lower temperatures across northern Europe by 5 to 15 degrees Celsius. That would make much of Scandinavia, Britain, Ireland, and northern France nearly uninhabitable during winter. But it's not just about cold weather. The AMOC collapse would fundamentally reorganize the entire climate system across the northern hemisphere. Rainfall patterns would shift dramatically. The monsoons that feed billions of people in Africa and Asia would weaken or fail. Sea levels along the North American east coast would rise by an additional half meter as water that normally flows toward Europe backs up against the continent. Global fisheries would collapse as ocean ecosystems, adapted to current patterns over thousands of years, suddenly face entirely new conditions. And perhaps most critically, agricultural systems across Europe and North America would face unprecedented disruption. Europe currently feeds over 700 million people. Its agricultural productivity depends entirely on its unusually mild climate. France, Germany, Poland, these countries sit at latitudes that in North America produce barely any crops. A return to the climate that should exist at those latitudes would devastate European agriculture. The economic impact would be measured in the trillions of dollars. But the human impact would be even more staggering. We're talking about potential mass migration on a scale never seen in human history. Hundreds of millions of people living in regions that become too cold for modern agriculture or even comfortable habitation. And here's the cruelest irony: this isn't a natural cycle. The AMOC has remained relatively stable for the past 8,000 years, since the end of the last ice age. The current destabilization is directly linked to human-caused climate change. We're heating the planet, which melts Greenland, which floods the North Atlantic with fresh water, which shuts down the current that keeps Europe warm, which triggers an ice age in Europe even as the rest of the planet continues warming. It's a perfect example of why climate change is so dangerous. It's not just about things getting uniformly warmer. It's about destabilizing systems that have kept the planet habitable for human civilization. And those systems can flip faster than we ever thought possible. So what can we do? The honest answer is we don't know if we can stop this. The AMOC is already weakened, and the Greenland ice sheet will continue melting for decades even if we stopped all emissions today. The momentum is already built into the system. But we can still slow the process. Every fraction of a degree of warming we prevent means less ice melt, less fresh water entering the ocean, and more time before we reach that tipping point. It might mean the difference between a gradual adaptation and a catastrophic collapse. Recent research on Doggerland, the now submerged landmass that once connected Britain to Europe, offers a strange kind of hope. Studies published in 2024 show that even during dramatic climate shifts at the end of the last ice age, pockets of the landscape remained habitable. Forests grew there thousands of years earlier than previously thought. Humans and animals found refuge even as ice sheets retreated and sea levels rose. Life is resilient. Human societies are adaptable. But there are limits. And we're testing those limits with a planetary scale experiment that we don't fully understand and can't easily reverse. The AMOC has been running for millions of years. It's survived ice ages and warm periods, asteroid impacts, and volcanic eruptions. But it's never faced the rate of change we're imposing on it now. We're pushing the system faster than it's been pushed in at least 100,000 years. The question isn't whether the AMOC can collapse. We know it can. It's happened before. The question is whether we're going to let it happen again, this time to a world with 8 billion people depending on stable climate systems for food, water, and shelter. The European Ice Age isn't some distant theoretical possibility. It's a real threat, supported by hard data and historical precedent. And it's coming sooner than we thought. The only question left is whether we'll act in time.